me share my screen.
So welcome you all for the today's webinar, data production, which is the 5 real-time challenges that business need to be prepared for, keeping in the the PDP bill which is in progress. So I welcome all the panelists as well as all the attendees for making up your time to join this webinar, the important webinar. Just before we proceed with webinar, just introduction about CISA. As you all know, CISA for the last 16 years. CISA is a forensics-driven cybersecurity organization, and we have been there serving 2,000 plus global customers. And every year we do have 1,000 plus active engagements with the customers. To give you a brief about CISA, we are one of the top 4 PFI investigators in the globe, and we are the only one in India. So today, before we start the session, the panel discussion will last for 60 minutes, out of which we will have 50 minutes for the panel discussion and 10 minutes, which we will keep it for the Q&A session. You can also just sending your questions through chat, and we'll be able to address it as and when. All the attendees will be muted automatically to enable the speakers to present without any further interruptions. And myself, I'm Venkat. I'm the host for the day. I take care of the global business for the cybersecurity product division. Let me introduce the moderator for the day, Mr. Darshan Shantamurthy. He doesn't require any introduction, but still, let me introduce. He's the CEO of CISA. He has got more than 2 decades of experience serving cybersecurity industry, and he has been working closely with all the CXO level people to understand the security challenges and strategize to provide a security posture. Darshan, he is also one of the global forensic investigator, also the first PSA in Asia. To add more, he is also a chartered accountant, though he is into the PFI. And this is in the brief. I hand over to Darshan for introduce the panelists. Over to you, Darshan.
Thanks, Venkat, for the kind introduction. Very good afternoon to all of you from India, and then and hello to everyone from outside India. Thanks for taking time for joining this webinar, all interesting webinar. We've got 2 interesting and accomplished speakers today, along with me. One is Rahul Rajendra Prasad, who's the data privacy, who's part of the data privacy office at HDFC Bank. As we all know, HDFC Bank is a thought leader, not just in the banking industry in India, but in Asia. So we're very glad to get his perspective. And Rahul has, of course, been extensive in terms of having experience in terms of data governance, information security, and data privacy. He also brings in real world experience. I'm sure that we're going to have some very interesting conversation with him. We've already started getting a lot of questions from the audience, so we will be glad to get answered by Rahul. Also, I have with me my colleague Aurobindo Patra. We call him AP. AP has been with CISA for the last 11 years. He's basically a solutions architect in terms of architecting for data protection products, and he leads our practice for data protection. He comes from a different background, more in terms of solutions, IT solutions, and he works with global cybersecurity, global audience in terms of the banking and the financial organizations wanting to meet various data protection and privacy regulations that govern in their market. So we're glad to have different perspectives. One is a practitioner and one sitting on the outside building technology solutions. And myself more as a forensic investigator who kind of engages on breaches. So that's something that I would like to add on top of Rahul and AP. Without further ado, I think we can move forward. I'll probably set the stage for adding a little bit of context to this discussion, this webinar that we are having. So first of all, we all know that the global data regulations were moving quite fast before the pandemic, and then as we are tapering down the pandemic now, we've seen greater amount of interest on a global basis there's a lot of engagement and activity happening around data protection, including the one which is happening in India. One of the key things that is driving is, of course, advancement in technology is making things pretty challenging, especially with cross-border data transfers. What we define as what is covered in these regulations or acts. As we know, in India, it started with personal data, so much so that the bill was called as Personal Data Protection Bill, and now it's become a Data Protection Act. So what is covered within this ambit of these regulations? There's a lot of activity around that space, and of course the data breaches, which we are seeing as a approved payment forensic investigator and the only one in the country. We see a lot of breaches, obviously thanks to the increased insider threat that is happening, and of course data proliferation that is across board. The data breaches continue to rise, and we have great concern to organizations today, and which is also accelerating the data regulation space. So much so, if you look at the JPC report, which is published in December, they've kind of named all the compromises or breaches that have happened globally, and it is definitely having regulators to to wake up and take cognizance and push them to take some action, which may be in the form of these kinds of acts or bills. And of course, every country is moving in that direction. Today, more than 120 countries are engaged in some form of international privacy laws. We've had China go through its own personal information protection law. We've got Brazil, the LGPD, the Singapore with the PDPA, and of course India, and and of course South Africa going with the POPIA, and India. The Data Protection Act, which is still, of course, to be enacted, is on the cards. And on the other side, you've seen the CISOs and the data protection officers. There is of course, this data protection brings in a very nice ambit of how one of the key things that maybe Rahul can also add later during the conversation is how organizations are strategizing from a structure standpoint to address these kinds of things. How are they organizing themselves? Are they creating new offices? Or is it going to be under the CISO's office? Something that we can bring in and he can share his thoughts. But one of the key things that we are seeing is definitely there are organizations who kind of kickstarted and started moving in this direction. They're not waiting for this, though the bill provides for 2 years timeline from the notification. But we've seen organizations take cognizance of it and already started working on it, because certain things are best practices. And one of the major drivers for this kinds of actions is going to be reputational damage, because no organization wants to be in a zone where it's not just about the fines or the penalties, but it's more of a reputational because of the mandatory disclosures that might come in. And there's also with the advent of and with the acceleration, I should say, with newer technologies coming in, an extreme amount of data personalization that is happening, which requires a lot of organizations to collect a lot of data, to personalize and to serve their end users a lot better. Now, how do you balance that with these kinds of acts, but at the same time provide that personalization? So how do you do it? That's where the advent of privacy enhancing technologies and a lot of technology innovation is up for grabs, and that's where maybe AP can add more. With that, talk a little bit about the 5 global data challenges, and then request Rahul to give some opening remarks and AP to give some opening remarks. And then we can have a set of questions that I can open. But before I open it for Rahul and AP, so one of the key things that I've, what I've kind of summarized to also spring some thoughts from each of the panelists here is one is the exponential growth of data and devices. There is definitely in the banking sector, we've seen a great utilization of technology at its best. We have seen in the pandemic the KYC. It's many banks pivoted to remote KYC, and they've been able to do it successfully. So it'll be interesting, and the data proliferation and exponential growth of data is just phenomenal. How the data is going up, especially in the FSI sector, and of course, organizations cannot keep their data private if they're not aware of the existence. There's this new term that started called dark data, which today one of the biggest problems is the data protection officers, or for example, the people who are supposed to the data fiduciary is required to make sure that they control the data. And with work from home, with remote setups, dark data growth is of serious concern. And of course, data localization. We've seen that every country wants to have sovereignty on the data. And there's been a push from even our own Data Protection Act to localize a lot of data. And one of the key things that they've spoken about is also a source of employment, or a source of generation of employment as organizations start setting up data centers and so on and so forth. And of course, you have the other challenges: data compliance, damage cost, which is phenomenal. And of course, definitely practitioners and end users, the compliance fatigue. We'll talk about a little bit of it. But these are some of the high level things that I have charted down. But I'm sure we will talk about a lot of these challenges as we move forward and go further. With that, I would request Rahul to share his opening remarks for 2 minutes. Rahul, if you can hear me.
Hi, I can hear Darshan. So I think is audible. So very good afternoon, everyone who is listening to this podcast, webcast. So it's a very important topic which Darshan has touched upon during his opening remarks on the data privacy, especially in data protection. And the challenge what we see across the industry, and I'm not just talking about BFS, I'm talking about overall industry. There are a couple of challenges, and which certainly we'll talk during the webinar. But one of the key thing is, first of all, to understand what is privacy and what is security, because a lot of time we have seen these two terms are getting jumbled up, right? So people take security and privacy as a single term, right? But those are quite different. We can talk about this later. And the second is about the definition of data, because that's very important, that you should know means what is data, because the way that data protection laws has emerged, right? So if you look at the EU DPD or other laws which were from 90s, so they would define that name, or your they will explicitly give you a laundry list that what to constitute PII. But as Darshan has told, that the data has grown exponentially, so the definition has also changed a lot. So if you see the definition of personal data in GDPR or in the upcoming Indian law, it clearly states that any data from which you can identify a person directly or indirectly. So that definition becomes very challenging for us as a person who is working this field, that what would constitute a personal data, what would not constitute a personal data. And also the visibility of data, because of this open, I would say, parameterless organization, because you are engaging with various third-party entities, probably your vendors or your partners via APIs, or there are many ways that data is getting shared, right? So to get a visibility of end-to-end data flows are again the challenge, and which we can discuss during this talk. And I'm sure we'll touch on that, and we'll expect some views from Ashwin and Darshan on that part as well, and from AP. So That's it. That's it from my side.
Thanks, Rahul. Indeed, very challenging. When you actually can, especially with the de-identification and the re-identification, that ability of re-identification, and then how do you, and it all comes within the ambit of Data Protection Act. How do you take care of such data? Is actually going to be one of the biggest challenges. AP, any opening remarks that you would have?
Yeah, definitely. So as the name suggests, from the webinar, so the key challenges of the data protections, right? So definitely, once the data protection bill will come, right? So there are a lot of technology evolutions also will come, because now the businesses, they are storing any kind of data. There is no restrictions. So anyone can store any kind of data, okay? And there is no law, what kind of data you will process, what you will do with that data, okay? So there is going to be strict guidelines on those things. So as an organization or as a solution architect, I can see, when you are designing the application itself, okay, so from the beginning itself, we have to proactively, identify those things, that what are the kind of data our application is going to store, okay? And for how long we are going to store, and what are the things we are going to process, okay? And then definitely, as Rahul mentioned, so definitely the cross-border data transfers and all those things, clauses are also coming. So we need to bring back the data, the critical sensitive data, outside India to India. So what are the challenges we'll face on all those things, and the data retention policies and all those things? So definitely those things we'll discuss during this panel discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, AP. Thanks, Rahul, for those brief remarks. Just while we proceed in this webinar, we've got quite a accomplished set of participants. So I would encourage each one of you to raise as many questions as possible. We would like to keep this as interactive and as beneficial to each of us. I'm sure many of these are we're all learning, and we would also we'll make an attempt to answer any of the questions, but in case we can't, we'll get back to you. But we would definitely try to keep this conversation as interactive as possible. I would start with one first question, possibly for Rahul, especially I touched about it a little bit on the KYC. Banking as a domain has huge amount of data. Right from the application forms. I just signed some application form today for my own personal bank account, and I literally had to sign some 70 pages or 80 pages to open an account. And that it has every data of my entire banking personal history, right from my Aadhaar to to my date of birth, entire complete data. I know you can't talk for HDFC Bank, but generally as a banking industry, how do you see this, these kinds of, once this data protection comes in, how do you see this playing out, and how will you see banking industry adopt to this kind of a massive change? Just curious to get some thoughts from your side, Rahul.
Yeah, sure. So the law, if you see when the law would come, okay, so it has got many of those provisions which, as a Indian, means not even the banking industry, nowhere any industry in India have seen, right? So one of the key challenges, or what I would say, one of the key things what we have to take care when this laws come, especially the BFSI industry, as you said that you have to sign so much of forms and there was so much of data. So, and the challenge with banking is that you have data it coming digitally and coming physically. Yeah, so you have signed a physical form and then you have signed a digital form. Okay, so ensuring the consent. Okay, so consent is the key part, that how we can ensure the consent of users are being taken as per the law, and how the consent is getting centralized. That is one of the challenge what I see. The second challenge what I see, as I told you, is on the definition of data. So if you see the definition of data in proposed law, so it has two sets of, I would say three sets of data, but third one, critical, is not defined, but they have tried to define what is personal data and what is sensitive personal data. So personal data, as I told in my opening remarks, is any data by which you can identify a person directly or indirectly. So direct set of data is very easy to see that, okay, if you say Darshan and his address, it is a direct set of data. But if somebody, indirect set of data would be a data where somebody would say that CEO of CISA, right? So I'm not taking Darshan's name anywhere, but I know it is Darshan which you are talking about. So how to get a context of indirect data, what we are collecting and how we are storing, that becomes very challenging. So to identify or to define that what would fall in that indirect category of data becomes is going to be a challenge, and that is something which as an organization you have to start with identify you are collecting and have a data inventory sort of thing in your place where you know that and then try to map it to the definition. Okay, so I know that what data I'm collecting. So first I get a repository and then I try to map it back to the definition of what would constitute a personal data and what would not constitute a personal data. And that way go for the sensitive data also, because if you see the definition of financial information, it is very, it is being defined a way that any data from which you can identify whatever I'm collecting becomes your personal data. So I think the definition of that is challenging, and the way organization can start and the way I'm looking at it and we are trying to do is to first of all make an inventory, draw data flow diagram, try to see, engage with your business and try to see where the data is flowing, and first get an inventory, right? So because if you do not know what data you have, you cannot implement any of the control. So that is the first key thing what you have to do, and that is the biggest challenge which I see as a banking would be there. And the second is obviously the cultural shift, I would say, because you know, as an Indian, the privacy is something which we do not take so serious, right? The way it is in other countries, though it has started picking up, and the expectation of customers have really increased because of obviously the Cambridge Analytica scandal or recent update, WhatsApp policy update, what has happened, right? So I will not get deep into that, but the awareness of customers have really started, and customers are seeking some expectations. So as I spoke earlier in this talk, that first of all, you have to understand what is privacy and what is security, right? So security is I get your data and secure it, I encrypt my your data, and that's it. So there are many controls to it, but that's at a high level. I have to secure your data. But the privacy is something where you have to be transparent to your customer, right? You have to be transparent to your customer that if I am collecting your data, then for what purpose I'm going to use it, and I should clearly take a consent on it, right? So the expectation of customer has really increased. So that's become pressure on banking industry also, because the expectation, you have to meet the expectation of customers, right? And privacy is all about being transparent to the customer. So the another challenge would be apart from this data is to how we can ensure that my policies, my products become transparent by design. So these are the couple of things what we can try to see and see how we can embed that in our processes, how we can have applications which are privacy by default, which are providing. So these are a couple of things what I would say as a challenge in the banking industry.
Fantastic. Rahul, you touched upon something so sensitive, which is context-based, identification of data. It's going to be very, very challenging. How do you arrive at the context, and then you can. And second, of course, is data inventory. But AP, if I were to pull you in for this from a product, what are the how can from an engineering standpoint, from a product solution standpoint, can one address these kinds of challenges that the industry is going to face, especially context-driven, identification of data? How, for example, as Rahul said, someone's role or designation is good enough for you to actually then link it and identify. That is number one. Number two is data flows, right? So from a technology standpoint, how is the industry actually going towards making sure that the data flow is made simple, because you got data proliferation everywhere, and many organizations are duplication. Of course, we talk about deduplication and things like that, but from a technology solution standpoint. But so tell me a little bit from a technology standpoint how organizations can and should address, or what have we been seeing bulk of our customers do it right. Just curious.
Yeah, so definitely. So the first thing is identification of the data, because data is everywhere. So first you need to identify where you are storing the sensitive data, where you are storing what kind of data. So for that, that's what you have to use some kind of automations process or tools to identify that, because manual identification is a very challenging process in that. So while identifications, you can also use some kind of classifications, like you can define your PII type. So what is the business requirement for storing this PII type, whether it's for marketing purpose or for what purpose? And then you can define the retention policies, like for how long you want going to retain that data. Okay. And then you can also define, so what is this risk score for that PII type, whether it comes under low, medium, and high risk. So that kind of categorizations also you can do. Then once you will identify that data, all these data classifications, you can provide it. Okay. And then based on that, first you will identify, and then once you will identify that, in this place I have the sensitive data, in this place I have this kind of data, then we can take appropriate remediations. Like suppose you'll discover that some sensitive data is identified in some of these locations where it is not supposed to be. So you can do some remediations. You can move the data to a more secure locations. Okay. Or so there are different kind of remediations. One is masking, truncating, deleting that, permanent deletions also you can do it. But definitely all those sensitive data or those data you need for your business. So you have to store, or you have to process that data in such a way that it is even though someone will have that data, it is more secure. So that's what organizations are doing. Few of the things like anonymizations and pseudomizations, to secure that data. As Rahul mentioned, the data can be in one data set or multiple data sets. So the data can be re-identified by combining multiple data sets. So there's still the risk is there in such kind of a scenario. Okay. Now basically in case of pseudomizations, so where you can split the data set into multiple things and you can scramble the data, but still there is a risk of re-identification of the data. But in case of anonymizations, so the data cannot be re-identified. So there is a more secure way of doing it. So anyone will have that kind of architectures, then definitely you cannot re-identify the data. But definitely the challenges is there to create that kind of architecture in the data flow or anywhere in the applications. So for the critical sensitive data, definitely we can work on these anonymization techniques.
Yeah, but then the challenge will be that you can't re-identify them. So that because many of the use cases would be that bulk of the organizations would need the data at some point in time, right? So anyway, it's a topic open for for debate, but I think it's a good time to actually involve the audience and run a poll. So Ashwini, if you are on the call, can you just quickly run a poll and let's get to understand how the audience, what audience think. Yeah, Ashwini.
Yeah. We have a question on privacy by design. Let me launch a poll.
So the question we've got is, have you already in your organizations incorporate privacy by design into your IT system? You can either click a yes or a no. Yes is you follow the privacy by design approach. No, not yet is the other option. So just to get to know how many people are, how many organizations have started doing it, just curious. So you can probably take about 10 seconds and please click the answer which makes sense to you.
So I'm ending the poll.
Sure.
Probably you can share results.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So 78% have already started doing it. Yes, they follow privacy by design, which is very heartening to note. That's good. It's good that the, many organizations have started doing it. But Rahul, you have any quick comments on that poll? I mean, have we got privacy by design right in terms of definition? Or is it that, we yet to go a long way? What's your thoughts? I mean, generally as an industry, just curious.
So privacy by design, Darshan, again, I would say is something which has to be there, right? So so first of all, we have to understand very quickly what do you mean by privacy by design. So one of the key principles, what I see privacy by design is that the privacy has to be provided by default to the customer, right? So let's say if I have an app, right, and in that app, I would be disallowing all the permission, and then what user want, he should be able to select what permission he want me to give, right? There would be certain set of permission which I need and which I have to tell upfront to the user, but there are certain things which I may not need. I may need it for some purpose, but not for the primary purpose, right? So first I have to ensure that how I'm ensuring privacy by default, right? So if you see examples, what these giants have done, right? Like Facebook, it was tag, you can tag your friend, but they have stopped it, right? So I see means what I see from the poll that the companies have started doing it, which is a good thing. But first of all, we have to discuss this with our business and try to see because if you implement privacy by design, then obviously the customer experiences do away, right? So how I can bring a balance between these two is the key challenge. What we have to see, I can have a stricter privacy by design policy, but it may not give the better customer experience. If I allow my customer to reject all the cookies, right, so he cannot do anything on it. So I have to see and how I can implement those policy in a way that it becomes transparent to the customer, plus it also become beneficial for the business also. That's how I have to go ahead and implement any control when we talk about privacy by design.
Fantastic point. I think, Rahul, one of the key observations that we have seen is also different people have different understanding of what you mean by privacy by design. And one of the biggest problems when we've seen organizations implement such kinds of measures is consent fatigue, and then even the act, at least the JPC recommendations talk about consent manager, and or rather it was there in the earlier Justice Krishna's thing also, but they're kind of wanting to bring this as a separate definition. So moving forward, I would like to take one question from the audience at this point in time, so that we keep the audience engaged. I think the question here is, we've got a question from Virinchi when he says, when you say indirect data that can identify a person, then it is also possible that some data points by themselves might not make useful, but 3 to 5 data points together can use it to logically identify a person. So can we classify any data as non-personal in such a situation? Rahul, AP, any one of you want to take that?
Yeah, so I would like to take that. So when we talk about personal data, right, and when we talk about indirect personal data, so it has to be looked into a combination, right? So that's what I was saying, that it has to be looked into the combination, not a single set of data would constitute a direct indirect personal data. So you have to see the context of it. So contextual definition and identification of data becomes very important, and that's what I have, as I spoken earlier, was we have to first of all leave the definition apart and go and talk to the business and tell what data you are collecting, right? Start gathering that list and then try to map it back to the definition, right? So then only you would able to identify, because every business or every vertical of industry would have different set of indirect personal data. So, the direct personal data may be similar, but indirect would differ, right? So you have to see, so document it and then try to map it to the definition. Obviously, then only you can look at the what would be the contextual. When I say about contextual data, then you would be able to, then you should be kind of defining it as a sensitive or non-sensitive, or personal data or non-personal data. But one more thing is that the new proposal which they have given, they have also trying to bring in ambit of anonymized data as non-personal data as part of it, right? So that we have to see how industry would change that way, because that's become quite tricky then because of the new change.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's going to be, and they've also, non-personal data includes anonymized data as well. So it is quite there. And then one of the key things that they're proposing is also that if even the non-personal data is breached, that also requires that also comes within the breach disclosure norms here. So AP, one quick question, maybe a 30-second quick reply to that is, how, from a technology standpoint, how can we bring in, because this is a very important point, like, bringing contextualized based data, right? How do you identify from a technology standpoint? We can identify, I know we do data discovery for, personally identifiable information, but how do you do it for indirect or contextual based data? I mean, is there any technological solutions where you can bring in analytics or use machine learning and solve that piece? Just curious, because from manual, sometimes you really can't. I mean, this kind of identification, you really can't do it manually, isn't it?
Definitely. So because there'll be a lot of data set, right, and a lot of data. So you have to map each and every data set, okay, to check, which data set is mapping and where you are able to, de-identify the data and see the complete picture, right? So definitely, there are a lot of, logical implementation we need to do it. Okay. And then there is a solutions in terms of machine learning also, because, most of them will be like keyword based. So where you can also, train to identify, because you can map with which data set can be, your near identical data set, so that you can identify, and then you can, instead of mapping with 100 or 1,000 of data sets, you can maybe reduce to, maybe 100, 20 or 30 reduce. So in that way, you can save time on the processing and on identification of the data. Okay. So that is where you can do it. And yeah.
Fantastic. It's good that we can use technology to solve problems also, and not just create problems for all of us. So hopefully we on a technology standpoint are able to, as the industry, are able to innovate and come with solutions. I'm sure we would do that. Moving on to the next question, I think we have some questions coming in, pouring in, both from LinkedIn Live as well as on our chat windows here. So there's a question from Ramesh, which says, if we take an example of banking or healthcare kind of domains, the individuals provide a lot of personal data. How do we define that when we delete such personal data after a certain period? How do we define when to delete such personal data after a certain period? I think it's talking about data retention. So if the data is deleted, then how the records are maintained, especially in banking insurance sector. So Rahul, I think you might be best equipped to do it, because there is also a mandate that even a regulator would expect the data to be stored for a certain period for compliance standpoint. So how does it work, especially in the banking domain, and how do you manage data retention? Curious.
Okay, so primarily in the banking sector, right? So this whole thing is governed by various laws, like RBI has certain time period. We have PMLA, which is Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which asks us to keep data for 10 years or so, right? So that is how we kind of manage it in the bank. But the key here is to have a proper retention schedule defined from each set of data. Because as per the personal data protection bill, it states that when the purpose is over, you should be purging the data, unless there is no law or regulation which mandates you to keep the data for the certain period of time. So we have to engage probably with the compliance teams and the legal teams to look at various regulation across the board, or which I, as a company, I need to adhere to, and then basis that define the retention schedule, probably what would be the retention schedule for each set of data, and then implement it across the board. So that is how we can take care of this challenge.
Yeah. So where Rahul's point, yeah. So few things definitely. the data which you are storing in applications or database, those are the structured data. So as you have discussed earlier, so the privacy by design, right? So that we can apply, and we can define the retention policies. And then after a certain amount of time, in the application itself, we can handle, so where the data can be automatically deleted, or maybe, it will move to some quarantine place. But maybe the challenges is on the data or the files like PDF files where, few of the users, they have downloaded, in their desktops and all those things. So we cannot apply the data retention policies easily on that particular files. So for that, we need to discover, those data first periodically, and then we can define it. Or there might be some alternative solutions where creating the document itself, you can have some data retention policies, maybe some kind of tool we can create automatically, which gets deleted.
Yeah, good point, AP. I think one of the key things is to, that's when you say privacy by design is how do you have applications to consider retention, just not about consent, but data storage and retention can be, built, applications can be built in that such a way. And then of course, using data discovery and classification tools to identify unstructured data and of course structured data. And one of the key things that, as solutions we need to bring out is one single pane of glass view for DPOs or CISOs, whichever function actually moves and governs this, to kind of have a single pane of glass view across the enterprise, including work from home, cloud, everywhere, where they can manage and kind of discover, classify, and then have that entire data lifecycle process, which will also be a good thing, as we move forward. That also, moving forward to the next thing, changing gears here, subject matter, data subject requests, right? So this is one with the data proliferation. Obviously, you've got all sorts of, and obviously, as a data fiduciary, one is required to honor, data deletion or and also reply within a certain period of time. So any quick thoughts on when a data principal requests, how do you honor those? How does data fiduciaries honor those kinds of requirements and requests? Quick views, Rahul and AP. I think we can talk a lot about this by itself, but a quick 30-second thoughts on that, Rahul.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Darshan. I think that's the one of the key areas when this law would come in place is to honor the rights, because I told earlier that privacy is all about rights of the end user, right? So we have to honor their rights. So first and foremost, as I told earlier, was to identify the flow of data becomes very critical in this phase, because a request comes, then you should be knowing that where this data is being held, means where the data is across my organization or outside my organization, if I have shared for certain purposes, right? So that is first thing you have to document it, obviously. The second is once the user requests deletion of data, right? So we have all, if you take example of GDPR, right? So you can actually get back to them with the, if you have a legal requirement to store the data for a certain period, which is required by law of the land, then obviously you can politely go back and tell them that this set of data we cannot provide because of the fact that we have to be in compliance with certain requirements, which are especially on money laundering side, which I see where you have a lot of data retention. So that is how we can go back to them. But first thing is to understand the flow of data, because without that you cannot honor any of the rights of your data subject.
Absolutely. Very well said, Rahul. So for AP, technology wise, because there are going to be data subject requests and, organizations, which are even smaller organizations, would have data proliferated across their environment, right? If you have to honor those kinds of, first of all, how does one get to know what data is being stored where? And so what is your thoughts on that? And technology wise, what solutions are available in the marketplace to kind of help data protection officers comply with these kinds of requests?
Yeah, Yeah, so the data subject request or the data principles in the Indian Protection Act, right? So definitely it's a very huge process. Suppose someone you have to create a team, means if they will get some data subject requests, and they have to go and search and identify what kind of data we store. Minimally, that is impossible. We cannot do that because we are storing. We can store data anywhere, right? So that's what we can do is we can do the periodical scans and identify what are the data we are storing, personal data we are storing. And then there are a lot of technology currently we're using, like there are a lot of names, right? So we're using we're using some machine learning algorithm on the and training our data from the data dictionary. Okay, so that with the username or email ID we're mapping the data. Okay, so whenever any data subject request is coming, so we're just storing the metadata, like these are the information is stored of this particular person. These are the information, the name, email ID, and all, and date of birth is stored in this particular locations. So whenever any data subject request will come, we can just query it and we can identify what are the information stored where. So we can automate that process, and we can do the periodical scan and automate that process, and it can identify the data of the data subject from any sources. And the second thing which we can also do is a lot of plugins, like this is in terms of database scanning or any kind of scanning. But still the application, they can build the plugins for the data subject request itself, where they will have some APIs for querying the data subject and pass the data subject name, and then identify what are the PI data they are storing or they are not storing also. So there are also some solutions we can provide around that.
Fantastic. Good. We have lots of questions coming in from LinkedIn Live also. I'm seeing some questions here, but I will open this up for poll. Our second poll. Ashwini, do you want to quickly run the second poll before I come back to the panelists for questions? So the second poll question is data retention policy. So the data retention policy means that deleted data is not retained. Who reviews the data at your organization to identify what needs to be archived or deleted? Basically, is it, so which office inside your organization is doing it? Is it the CISO office, the data protection officer, data privacy officer? Just, not applicable. Maybe take 15 seconds quickly. I think that's an easy question. There's no right or wrong answer, I guess, here, but
So I'm just ending the poll.
okay, so yeah. All right, just curious to know. Okay, so I think people are going with the data privacy officer. Okay, so there are organizations creating that role. Rahul, what do you see as the organization? Just this was the opening remarks which I had made. Are you seeing this office getting merged with the CISO's office, or is it going to become a separate? I know large organizations may have a different strategy than a mid-sized organization, but from a governance standpoint, how do you think this is going? Just
So from the governance point of view, Darshan, what I see as this office has to be independent the way they operate, right? And they can roll up to anyone, but the independence has to be ensured, because one of the key thing of this office or any privacy team is to be independent the way they do their assessment or they express their thoughts in terms of reviewing the product or anything. So the independence is the key thing what I see. Can roll up to anyone, but you have to ensure that how you're bringing independence is more important out here.
Fantastic. I think very, very well said. I think ability to, because at the end of the day, the data fiduciary has to appoint a data protection officer as per the bill, and that person should be able to take and is accountable for ensuring that the provisions of the act is followed. So, and it needs to be empowered, so to speak. So very valid point, Rahul. So before, I think we've just got a few more minutes before I hand it back to Venkat, but we've got questions here. I would like to take as many questions as possible in the audience. One question that I've got here on the Q&A is, does Hipaa require separate server for maintaining personal health data, or can we maintain data of all users in a common server? I think this is largely with respect to the US Health Insurance and Portability and Accountability Act. Anyone wants to take that? Rahul or AP, would you want to take it? Rahul, do you want to go, or should AP? I mean, either ways, it's fine.
So for that, I think we have to read the regulation, how it reads about, because that's specific to the regulation. But my experience with Hipaa, and I have worked very long back in that area, right? It was almost many years I have worked in that. So I have not seen any requirement like that, but yeah, you have to refer to, because Hipaa has three requirements. One is privacy rule, one is
Safeguards,
safeguard rule, and one is your safe harbor rule. So you have to read the safeguard rule and the privacy rule to see how it comes. Like, so they have various requirements. One has to be implemented, which is mandatory. One is basis your risk, you can implement to see that in that list wherever it falls, and basis that you can take a call.
Absolutely, Rahul. So one of the key things that just to build on whatever you said, so Health Insurance and Portability Accountability Act has multiple safeguards. One is the physical, and then there's technical, and then there is administrative safeguards, which you rightly covered. And then so the technical safeguards has that, but there is in my best knowledge, there is nothing which specifies that you need to have a separate server, but I mean, the way these laws are formulated, or these acts are formulated, is they'll not be prescriptive. They will say that you need to ensure that they are protected, and obviously you need to have encrypted, and you should not mix up the data. So data isolation should be possible, and as long as technically you're able to accomplish this, from various technological solutions, you should be okay, is what I feel. It's not mandatory that you need to have, otherwise many organizations have business where their business is to service multiple customers, multiple healthcare organizations. You cannot say that you will have a separate server, because their business model will go away. So especially a common service provider or service providers who cater to multiple covered entities, so to speak, healthcare providers. So I think it should be okay if you maintain it even in a common server, as long as you're able to provide necessary assurance. And just to build on Rahul, what Rahul said is, and there is also mandatory under Hipaa to do a risk analysis. So as part of your risk analysis, you can ensure that your risks are identified, and you have taken suitable protection mechanisms, and map the technical safeguards to protect it against any possible kind of threats. So if you've addressed that, I think we should be okay. So I think that question is answered. Then we've got one more question, which is coming from LinkedIn Live, is screen recording inbuilt on iOS or iOS. Does it break privacy policy? I'm not sure whether I'm equipped to answer this question. Anyone wants to take a dig at it? Rahul or AP? It says screen recording inbuilt in iOS or iOS devices. This question has come from LinkedIn Live. Does it break the privacy policy? It depends on what the privacy policy is, but I don't know.
Yeah, it totally depends on the privacy policy. That's right. And as I told you, these all will constitute the permissions, right? So what you have to ensure is that whatever is the purpose of your app, the permissions should be tying back to it, right? You should not be taking permission of something which your app doesn't cater to the customer, right? And also when you talk about permission, what I see the challenge is, so let's say location as a permission. So we have to see what is the purpose of your app. So let's say your app doesn't need specific location of person. You just need to look at the location that he's in Mumbai, or he's in Bangalore, or he's in Ahmedabad, this city. So you should be taking that permission, should not be pinpointing the exact permission. So your permission should always tie back to your purpose of your app, and the customer should be explicitly okaying it or giving his explicit consent, what we call it as opt-in. And then I think that's how you can address these challenges.
Yeah, very, very well said, Rahul. That brings me to one question that I have for AP is, how do you identify, how do you map purpose with the data? Because at the end of the day, one of the key things is from a data fiduciary responsibility is to also have an identity, also record. You have to use the data for that particular purpose that it has been, where the data principle is shared it, right? So as per the purpose that you have gathered the data, how do you, from a technology standpoint, how do you ensure that? You have any thoughts, AP?
No, so for structured data, anyway, we can define this PI data for what purpose. Okay, so this purpose for marketing or financial data and what. So that we can clearly define it. But when we are storing a document or something like that, so definitely, we can apply some, data labeling on that. And the second thing is, if you want to discover what kind of, what is the purpose of the data, then definitely, few of the tools, they can do the beyond the data discovery and identify and maybe different keywords and identify whether it's a HR data or marketing data, because they will understand, this is the HR documents, suppose some employee verification forms, okay, or KYC documents. So we can train, the similar kind of documents where they can identify in future, this is the KYC document, this is used for this purpose. So we can make.
Sure, fantastic. I think that's going to be very interesting to see from a technology standpoint. How do you identify and label purpose? So with that, I think fantastic set of questions. I tried my best to answer as many questions I can do, but we are up on our time. So I hand it back to Venkat, maybe for concluding the webinar. Back to you, Venkat.
Thanks, Darshan, Rahul, and AP. Ashwini, the final one question, could you please? Yeah, just the final question. We want CISA to help you in securing your sensitive data. Definitely, if you want more information, so definitely you can say, yes, please connect us. No, not right now, yes, but we need support for other cybersecurity requirements. Definitely, we are ready to help any organization here. Please just vote. We'll have 10 seconds time, and we'll try to help you out.
So I'm just ending the poll.
Yeah.
If any questions are there, please ask Venkat, or we can wrap it up. We are almost 2 minutes left. If
Okay.
Audience have any questions, please feel free to share the questions and we'll take it up.
There's one last question, if you don't mind, Venkat, me stepping in.
Yeah.
We have one question from Ramachandra. Do we need to have a separate Hipaa production database server, or also Hipaa Acts says databases need to be separate? Please correct me. So this is a question by Ramachandra. Do we need a separate Hipaa production database server? Also, Hipaa Act says database needs to be separated in the same server. I'm not the best equipped, Rama. Rahul, AP, do you have anything to reply to this?
I think it ties back to the earlier response, right, Darshan? What you have given is that you have to go back and see that what the law says about it. And again, as I told earlier, that in Hipaa also you have certain requirements which are mandatory, certain are non-mandatory, which you have implement basis the risk what you have, right? So first, see, mandatory, you have to do it. There is no choice about it. But non-mandatory, obviously, you can do your risk assessment and basis that you can see what I have to do, what I have not to do. So that is how you can handle the situation.
Perfect. And I kind of second that in terms of having a risk analysis being done for the optional safeguards, and then the mandatory safeguards has to be done in any which way. The next question, we've got 1 more minute. Ramesh has asked, when we host software solution on the cloud, we hear data residency requirements like my data should not reside in India only and should not leave my geo. What are the best practices and how do we control implementation that my data resides within my country? I think on the data localization requirement that is coming up in the Data Protection Act. Quick 30 seconds. AP, go ahead and answer 30 seconds, not more than 30 seconds, because we have time here. Yeah.
Sure. So definitely, organizations like especially banking and fintech, right? So they're global and they have to, meet the multiple privacy regulations. So if you're in European Union, you have to go with GDPR. If you're in India, you have to comply with, maybe in future for Indian Data Protection Act. But you are storing both, GDPR data and Indian data also. Okay. So and the same applications is used for both the for both the countries. So definitely you have to, so the cloud when you are hosting, right? So you can host in a different region and, same customer database, you can, suppose for European Union, you can host in, EU, and then for India, you can host in India. So you can bring the multi-tenancy architecture for the database. You can have the same applications also. And then the privacy by design also, you can add, you can segregate till the data level, also not from the database, entire database, but the data, what data is going to store where. So that also you can definitely segregate.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, AP, for making it quick. I know it's a very difficult answer. Data transfer, data localization is the subject which you can go on for hours. Back to you, Venkat, to wrap up the session.
Thanks, Darshan. I think thank you for moderating this session, Darshan. So I think I have to say big thanks to Rahul as well as AP for taking their time from their busy schedule and sharing the knowledge today. I think it was a wonderful, wonderful session. I think we can have a continuous session on this. I think there is a lot of information on this and we can have continuous sessions. Also, would like to thank all the audience for taking the time from their busy schedule and just putting their questions. I think we have tried level best to answer some of your questions. If you have any unanswered questions, please do let us know. You can reach out to us and we'll try to answer the best possible way. Definitely, we'll also be uploading the session in the YouTube. If any of your friends, colleagues, viewer are not attended this session, would like to know more about this session, you can also ask them to view in the YouTube. Thank you once again so much for Darshan as well as Rahul and AP for making this session more lively and more informative. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. Thank you.